Hey guys, Jan here, codingwithjan.com. Today we're going to be covering everything there is to know about Shopify Theme Sections in 2024 and beyond, also including the latest changes from Shopify Editions, like the new global theme blocks. So this is going to be brand new and a ton of fun, and I also highly recommend checking out the links in the description. But for now, let's begin. Alright, so sections are an extremely important concept in Shopify themes. They're kind of like the building blocks of a website, and we can add or remove them via the customizer. We can upload our own content, rearrange them, and they really help us build and maintain beautiful looking websites without even touching code. Now, if we dive one level deeper and take a look at how sections are configured, we usually find a few settings on a section level. So here I'm using the example of a featured collection. And if we click into the section, we can control things like the font size or the collection we want to display, and so on and so forth. This is great and already provides us with a lot of flexibility, but sections can be even more dynamic than that if they also feature so-called section blocks. So if we take a look at the slideshow element here, for example, we also find some settings on the section level, like how fast the slides are changing or what size they should have. So these settings here help us to control the section as a whole. But if we go back, we're also able to dynamically add up to 5 slides that can be configured individually. And these are called section blocks. So blocks are great if the developer doesn't know exactly how many content elements will be added and can provide a bit more flexibility that way. Okay, now one last thing I want to show you here is that section blocks are not limited to one specific type. We've just seen the slideshow example, and here we were only able to add further slides, which kind of makes sense. But if we have something like this rich text section here, we can see that this is made up of 3 different blocks. One block for the headline, then one paragraph, and one button. And we're able to add further blocks and then choose from heading, caption, text, or button. So we can add whatever we want, maybe like one small caption here, maybe another button. But the point is that we have different types of blocks to choose from for this rich text section here. So in summary, because this is so important, sections are like reusable elements that make sense as a unit, like the slideshow section. Then if we have settings on a section level, they usually help us to control the behavior of the entire element, like the slideshow rotation speed or the size. And then we have section blocks, which are even smaller components that we can add if we need a bit more flexibility in terms of the section's content, like adding slides, adding texts, adding buttons, adding headlines. And this is also going to be important in context of the new global theme blocks that we will talk more about in a second. All right, so now that we have a solid understanding of what sections are to begin with and how they behave on the customizer, let's see how that looks in the theme files. So therefore, I'm bringing up my Shopify admin dashboard, and under online store themes, I'm clicking these 3 dots here and then edit code, which brings up Shopify's internal theme editor. And in here, you should find one folder called sections, which, as the name suggests, contains all the section files of that theme, also including the ones that we just saw on the front end. So for example, here we have the slideshow section or the rich text section. Further, you can observe that all these files here have a .liquid extension. And if we click into one of these files, for example, rich text section, you will be able to see that these files are usually split into 2 parts. The lower part of the file is known as the section schema, starting with this schema tag right here. And this is where we can define the name of our section or all the different settings and input elements that we want to have available on the customizer. And all this here is written in JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it's a very structured format. And I'm also going to explain how you can read this here in a second. But first, let me quickly show you the upper part of that file. So this is where we find all the HTML, CSS, possibly some JavaScript that makes up the section. So this is where the actual section is built, also using all the dynamic data coming from the customizer settings. So oftentimes we see HTML elements here, for example, but then also some values coming from the section settings. Okay, now if you are a beginner, I know this can easily feel overwhelming because there's like so much code in these files, there's a lot going on. But also keep in mind that public themes have to work with a ton of different stores out there and a variety of different industries. So therefore, they need a lot of settings and basically provide that flexibility. And your first section, on the other hand, can be a lot less complex. And once you understand the basics of how to read this, it also isn't that complicated anymore. So for now, just remember that sections are divided into two parts. First, we have the actual implementation, and then we have the section schema, where we define all the customizer settings and input elements. Okay, so now that we know how sections behave on the customizer and how they roughly look in theme files, I think the best way to fully understand the concept and internalize everything is to just build a super simple section ourselves. A great beginner-friendly example here would be building an FAQ section. And even though the Dawn theme already has a collapsible row element, which could be used for that in theory, other themes may not have that, or maybe you have some special requirements. And an FAQ section is also a great introduction to section blocks, because it would be awesome if we could add or remove questions dynamically. Okay, so let's see how this is done. First, I would go ahead and add a new section file. And this is going to be of type liquid. File name is just going to be FAQ for simplicity. And as you can tell, the file is pretty much empty, except for a minimal schema tag already containing the name attribute and an empty array of settings. Okay, then I would prefer working on the customizer settings first. So the very first thing we can do here is change the section name to just FAQ. I will leave the settings empty for the moment, but I will add a comma at the end and then add another attribute called presets. And if you're wondering, in the presets attribute, we can define the default configuration of our new section, but we need to provide at least a name, like how it's displayed in the customizer, if we want this element available on all pages. Yeah, you can also include sections on very specific pages only, but we want it to be available on all pages, and therefore we have to add the presets attribute. So I'll add a colon, a pair of square brackets, and then inside a pair of curly brackets, with the name attribute, and we can also just set this to FAQ. Now if we save this file as is and then perform a quick refresh on the customizer, we should already be able to find this new section. So let's take a look right after the slideshow element, add new section, and it should be right at the bottom, FAQ. Yeah, no preview available. I mean, we didn't implement anything yet, but we can still add it to the page. There's just nothing visible because we didn't implement any settings yet, nor did we implement any content yet. Okay, next I would like to define the section settings as well as the section blocks. And as far as the settings goes, I think we just need one headline, like one text input element for the FAQ headline. And then for the blocks, we need a pair of question answer that we can add or remove dynamically depending on how many questions we have. So let's start by implementing the text field for our headline. And therefore I'm dropping into the array of settings, and I will add a pair of curly brackets. And then each input element has to be defined by at least 3 attributes. The type of input element, like what type is this going to be? Is it going to be text or product picker or an image picker? Then we also need a label to describe the input element and an ID, so that we can later reference this element in our markup. So let's type this out together. I'm starting with the type, comma at the end. Next is going to be label, comma at the end, and then an ID, no comma at the end because this is the last attribute here inside this object. And if you want to learn more about the different types of input elements, I can highly recommend this page here in the official documentation. So you can learn about the basic input settings like checkboxes, range selectors, text boxes, text areas, also with very helpful examples and use cases here. Or you can also learn about the more specialized input elements such as article selectors, collection selectors, font pickers, image picker, product picker, and so on and so forth. And for each of them, you also find an example down below. So this is very helpful. Now for the headline, we can keep it simple. This should just be of type text, and the label is going to be headline. And the ID can also be headline. Let's just keep it simple. Okay, if we save this right here and then check back on the front end, we should already see our new input element within the FAQ section, a text field for the headline, and we can already enter our new headline here, but so far it doesn't make any difference because we're not using this headline anywhere yet. I'm still going to save that for now and then jump back into the theme files. Alright, so now that we have an input field for the headline in place, the next thing I want to work on are the section blocks, and we have to define these apart from the section settings. So this is where the list of settings starts. This is where the list of setting ends. So right after this comma here, I'm going to drop into a new line and then type blocks, colon. And this is going to be a list again, or an array, a list of different blocks. And I will also add a comma at the end so that we maintain valid JSON. You always have to add a comma before a new property or attribute starts. Okay, now in this list or array of different blocks, I want to define a new block object. So a pair of curly brackets. And first we have to define the name of our block element. Maybe we can just call it question. Comma at the end. We also have to give it a type. For simplicity, we can also just call it a type question. And then we also have to define a list of different settings for our block element. So I'm typing settings, colon, and then a pair of square brackets to indicate we're starting a list or an array, better to say. And in here, I want to define two text input elements, one for each question and then one for the answer. So I'm adding the first element here. And this one is going to be of type text. The label is going to be question. And the ID is also going to be question. So this is going to be the first text input. Now I'm adding a second input element. So another pair of curly brackets. And this is pretty similar. So type is going to be text. Label is going to be answer. And the ID is going to be answer as well. So let me read this one more time. Here we're saying we want to define an array of all the different block types. This is the only one that we actually define because we just need one, a question and answer pair. And then every block needs to have a name, needs to have a type, and an array of settings for that block. And we just need two text fields, one for the question and one for the answer. So as you can see, it's not even that complicated once you understand how to read this. Now let's save this file and see if everything works. So asset saved, back to the customizer, quick refresh. And after the refresh is done, we still find our FAQ section right here. And on a section level, we still find our headline that we just entered before. But now we're also able to add new questions as section blocks. How awesome is that? So I'll go ahead and add a couple of questions, maybe 1, 2, 3. And if I click into one of these, I'm able to add a question and an answer. Super simple implementation, but now I will go ahead and fill this in with a bit of test data, just so that we have something to work with later on. And then I'm going to save that as well. Okay, so now that we have the schema for our section in place, and also some test data that we entered on the front end, we can work on the actual implementation, because right now we're not doing anything with this data. And just to show you that we are indeed in the right place, let me add a small test here on top, and then save this file really quick. Because after the next refresh, we can already see this small test right here, and we can move it around with our FAQ section. And this is exactly where we are going to be implementing the accordion. Okay, now since this is just going to be HTML and CSS and not something Shopify specific, I already went ahead and prepared a small FAQ accordion, which you can find dozens of tutorials for, or you can get some inspiration on CodePen or use the help of ChatGPT potentially. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and copy my markup, but I will still explain what we see. And yeah, we will make it as simple as possible and walk over that together. So let me show you this right here. Instead of my test code, I'm going to paste my HTML markup. So right on top, I have one container wrapping the entire FAQ section, followed by a headline, currently saying frequently asked questions, hard-coded, because I find it a bit easier to first get the element to work and only then replace everything with dynamic values coming from our settings. Next, we find an FAQ row for all the different questions, a label containing the question itself, like what is your return policy, and then another container FAQ answer containing the corresponding answer. And lastly, you can see these input elements of type checkbox. Those will be hidden on the front end, but I still need them in order to make the FAQ work. Because in my CSS styling rules, I implemented this in a way where you can click the label in order to toggle the checkbox. And if the checkbox is unchecked, I want to hide the answer. And if the checkbox is checked, then I want to show the answer. I can quickly show you how that looks before adding the CSS. So I will just save the markup here. So this is what the element looks like without any styling. You can see the checkbox here. And if I click on one of these questions, the checkbox gets checked or unchecked. And then I want to hide or show the answer respectively. So then in order to add my CSS rules, I'm going to create a new file in the themes assets folder. You can also see that there are a bunch of other CSS files for different components and different sections. So I'm just going to stick to the naming convention and name my CSS file section-faq. So assets, add new assets, create a blank file, CSS, and then section-faq. And then in here, I'm just pasting my styling rules. So here we're adding a bit of border radius, some padding, background colors. And this is what makes the FAQ work. So per default, the answers are hidden. But then if one of these checkboxes is indeed checked, then the next answer should be visible. Now let's go ahead and save this file as is. And then inside our FAQ section file, I want to include that CSS file right on top. So a pair of double curly brackets, and then in quotes the file name, section-faq.css, and then a liquid filter where we say this is an asset URL, and not only that, it should also be wrapped into a style sheet tag. Let's save this really quick and see if that works. So after the next refresh, we can see that the checkbox is hidden, it's still there, and every time we click on one of these labels here, the answer becomes hidden or visible. Okay, now we're almost there. We already have a working element, and now we just need to replace all these hard-coded values with the values coming from our customizer settings to make it truly dynamic. And that's what we're going to work on next. So let's get started right here. The headline is coming from the section.settings.headline. All right, that should be good. Then instead of these 3 hard-coded FAQ rows, question and answers, we want to render one for each block that was defined in the customizer. So let's type this out together. For every block in the section blocks, we want to render one of these FAQ rows, and then end for down below. Whenever you start a for loop, you also have to terminate it somewhere. Then we no longer need these other 2 hard-coded questions. So we can just get rid of these. And instead of the hard-coded question and answer, we can now use the one in the block settings. So we want to use the block.settings.question. And here we want to use the block.settings.answer. Okay, and with that, we should be good to go. Just one last detail here. In order for my implementation to work, the checkbox and the question always need to have the exact same ID. So question 1 needs the ID 1, question 2 needs the ID 2, question 3 needs the ID 3, and so forth. So what we can do here is use the current index of the for loop. So you can just type for loop.index, and that should be dynamically replaced with the current iteration. Okay, so one last time, quick recap. We do have our style sheet right here, then our FAQ section, with the headline coming from our customizer settings. And then for every block that was defined in the customizer, we're putting out a new FAQ row, and then we render the question and the answer dynamically. Let's save this and see if it works on the front end. And now after the next refresh, we should be able to see our test data here. We should be able to rearrange these blocks. We should be able to update them live, and we should be able to add new questions or delete existing ones. How cool is that? And now we're left with a fully functional FAQ page, entirely built from scratch. Whew. Okay, so far so awesome. Now that we know how to build an entire section from scratch, I also quickly want to show you where all the customizer data is stored, because I feel that's important and it can also be answered relatively quickly. So both the section settings as well as the block settings are always stored right in the page template where we include our section. So for example, here we included the FAQ section right on the home page, and that means it will be stored in the page template corresponding to the home page. Let me show you this really quick. So in the theme files, we can bring up the template folder, and here we should find the index.json file, which is the corresponding template for the home page. And here we can see all the different sections that were configured right on the home page. So for example, we have this image banner here. Then we have a featured collection. Next, we have an image with text element, a slideshow section, and here we find the instance of our FAQ section. So you can see it's of type FAQ. Here we have the data for the 2 blocks. Right now we have 2 questions and answers on the front end. So the first block of type question is, what is your return policy? And then the answer down below. And here we have the second block, also of type question. And yeah, the question is, do you offer international shipping? And the answer is yes, we do. Then the block order, because we could also rearrange them. And the section settings, here we only had 1 text field for the headline, which we've set to frequently asked questions. So as you can see, it's not even that hard to read once you understand how the JSON format works and once you develop the skill of reading this structured format, which I feel is very important because JSON is so commonly used in web development. Another interesting thing to mention when working with sections are translation values, because otherwise you might find them confusing when you see them for the first time. So if we take a look at one of the default sections, for example, we can take a look at the rich text section again. And then if we scroll down to the schema tag, you can see that for some of the attributes, like this name attribute here, or these different labels for different options, we don't find explicit values, but instead they point to a translation file. And these translation files can be found in the locales folder, where we find a variety of different languages. And then we can just click into the one we are interested in. So let's say we're interested in the English translation. And also make sure to select the schema.json file. And here we can now search for the rich text section, which is located right here. And here we find all the explicit values like the name, rich text, option 1 is left, option 2 is center, option 3 is right. And then for other languages, it would be translated accordingly. So that was more something I wanted to show you on the side, so you don't get confused if you ever encounter these expressions. But when working with clients or building sections for one specific store, I would usually default to just one language, either the client's language, if I speak that, or just English. All right, now this is the part we've all been waiting for. What are the new changes coming to Shopify sections in 2024? And first, we have the new global theme blocks, which by the time I'm recording this are still under developer preview, but here's how they work. As you can imagine, as a store grows, a lot of the sections start to share some common elements. For example, on this rich text section here, we can add section blocks to add a headline, some text, maybe some buttons, but the exact same elements or the exact same section blocks would also be useful on this image with text section. Yeah, here we also find a headline, some text and buttons. Historically, you would have to create these blocks from scratch for every section, or you would need to find a way to copy and paste them between your section files. But that also creates a lot of redundant work and it's also harder to maintain, because if you want to make a change to, let's say, all the buttons, then you would have to go into each section file and make the changes one by one. Now this is exactly where the new global theme blocks will come in, and they are located in a new dedicated folder in our theme files that goes by the name blocks. And in here we can define and build all these new global blocks that can then be reused in multiple sections. On the inside, these files are also structured very similar to our section files. We do find the implementation on top and then the schema down below where we define all the customizer settings. So with everything we've learned in today's video, you already know how to build these. If you want to make these theme blocks available on one of your sections, let me show you that as well. So I do have a small test section file right here in my section folder. And here we have to do 2 things. First, we have to declare that the blocks for this type of section should be of type @theme. And then we also have to define where these blocks should be rendered by adding the content for blocks tag. With these 2 things in place, we can then jump into the customizer. And after adding my new theme blocks test section right here, we should be able to see that all the global theme blocks are available and we can add them right here. How cool is that? Now, as I mentioned, all this is still under developer preview and brand new, but it's really the first milestone towards Shopify's greater vision of the customizer and the online store experience of the future. From what I've heard, theme blocks will also support nesting up to 8 levels deep, which might be very helpful if you want to display more complex content models, maybe something you've designed with metaobjects, which have been released last year, also have a full dedicated video on those. Or there might also be some synergy with the new up-and-coming flex sections that have been announced during summer editions last year, where merchants can just go into the customizer and then drag and drop or rearrange and resize components and sections. So yeah, as you can see, tons of exciting features in the pipeline, and I'll do my best to keep up with the changes and keep you informed. And as always, you will find the best resources I could find in the description. Alright guys, and with that I think we can bring this video to an end. I really hope this was a helpful starting guide in terms of sections and all the new updates. Now I'm super excited to hear your thoughts in the comment section, and make sure to check out the Editions page, which you will find in the description, as well as other useful links. And then make sure to have an amazing rest of your day. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.